Ready?
Recording in progress.
Good morning. What a beautiful day in Bluefield, and we're glad that you're here with us. We're continuing with our classes that we've started and been doing for several years now. Today is sort of focusing on the folks that are involved in the food truck incubator program. And so we're thankful to the folks that's here in person and the ones that are online, and then also recording this for the ones that couldn't make it today. I said this before last week when we had the Design for Delight training, which is design thinking. You could be the world's best cook. You could have the best name for the business. You could be in the best location, but if you can't manage the other aspects of your business, you're in trouble. And it's everything from cash flow to inventory and things like that. But also, we need to make sure, as we help you with your business plan, that you protect your credit score with your business, because that can help or can hinder you. And so today's class is a little bit about your credit score. To be honest, I think high schools ought to be doing this now, and I don't know that they do that. But it's very important, because when you go to borrow money for a vehicle or starting a business, it's important. And so we're pleased to partner with Truist today. Miss Marlowe and I have done numerous classes. Jordan, I think this is your first class here with us, and we appreciate him being with us. If you have any questions, they're the experts. And so I appreciate you being here. And if you have any questions about the food truck incubator program, please let me know. We're proud of the progress we see people making. Christy's graduated, Marshall and others that have already gone through the entrepreneurial boot camp class, and they're moving on. But don't worry, if you haven't graduated from that part yet, stay with us. We're going to get you through. Okay. All right. Thank you all.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I am far from an expert, so he shouldn't have said that term. I like to just refer to myself. I'm just a nerd that looks at numbers all day, basically. So, but certainly appreciate y'all coming out today. The last time I got to participate with this, I was in my office in Beckley virtually, and Caitlin was here in place. She's easier to look at than I am up here, so I apologize for that. But certainly, though, want to talk today about credit scores, because that is probably the most important thing whenever you're getting into business or, already in business, looking at expanding your business. It's one of the primary C's of credit. We always refer to the 3 C's of credit, which is your cash flow that's coming in to repay anything, your collateral for whatever the loan is that you're getting. And then the last C, and probably the most important, as I mentioned, is your credit score. And certainly with that, we want to talk about what goes into a credit score, because it seems like anymore, a credit score is just this imaginary number that follows you, and you don't know what you do on a daily basis that makes it go higher or lower. Sometimes you could think you could be doing something positive, and then you look and your credit scores drop 15 points and you're throwing your hands up like, well, what do I do now? So that's what we're here to talk about today, though, is, what goes into a credit score? What's a good credit score? What do we look for at the bank? What do you need when you're looking at doing financing, and so forth from that point? So if y'all are good with it, we'll go ahead and move on here into some of the slides. This is our primary slide that we have anytime Truist does a presentation, which is basically our mission and values and purpose that we have for Truist. And certainly our goal as a company is to build better lives and communities. And so that's why I'm here today in this beautiful city, to talk to you about these particular items here. But building your credit score, I think, is Marlo talking? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I'm
sorry, Marlo, we can't hear you.
That's okay.
Give us 1 second. You good now?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Jordan, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I did want to let everyone know, we also have Jean Muller with Truist Bank in the chat room, and she is also available to answer questions. She has some industry specific experience in operating a food truck business. So before we jump into the content, I wanted to let Jean introduce herself, just so that you all are aware that she's here online and can answer questions that are specific to the food truck operation. Jean, can you introduce yourself just for a moment, and then we'll let Jordan jump right back into his presentation?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Not, I am muted. Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me or not. This is Jean Muller, and I've been in the mortgage business for about 25 years. And for that, I had a lunch truck for 15. So I do understand the importance of credit scores and being able to purchase a food truck when you need one and getting a good rate on that. And I have since had 2 children and helped them build their credit. And I think that this is a great presentation, and I'm excited to be a part of it. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send them out in the chat.
Thank you, Jean. And we certainly appreciate Jean joining us today. As she mentioned, if you couldn't hear, she actually has direct experience. She owned and operated her own food truck. And so she definitely is a great resource. Should anybody have any questions at all, I can put you in contact with her if you want to email her directly and ask questions, whatever you would need whatsoever. So, but thank you, Jean. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the first slide here. And so it just kind of starts out with the general question, you know, what is a credit score? If somebody was to define a credit score, how would you define a credit score? What would you just say that it is?
So, make up a deal that you owe 90 days on and where you are. How many points you have.
Yep, and that's a great example. Honestly, it really is. That's exactly what it is. It's specifically to the hard definition of it. And like the slide here mentions, you know, it's a 3-digit number that basically states your ability and your credit worthiness that you will repay a debt. And that debt could be anything from a credit card to a smaller unsecured loan to a mortgage. But that number, like it or not, is your kind of rating that is applied to you on whether or not you're going to repay that or how quickly you're going to repay it. There's a lot that's behind that number and a lot that goes into it. And that's kind of what we're going to dive a little bit more in as well. And there, you can see here on the screen, there's 2 numbers that's listed on here. You know, it shows the number of 670. Anything above it is considered good. Anything below it is considered fair or poor. You know, I would say, I have a lot of people ask me sometimes, you know, what's the minimum credit score that you would lend money to me? Because what I do is I'm a commercial banker with Truist. I've been doing this for about 8 years, and so I lend directly to businesses, and so I have a lot of people ask me that, and my response is as well, there's not really a hard number, you know, that if you're below a 670, then we're not going to talk to you about a loan. That's not at all the case with that. There's a story behind the numbers. It's a 3-digit number, and there's so much behind it and so much that we can dive into and tell. You know, someone could have a 670 and simply have a 670 because maybe they have a higher balance on their credit card at the time. It's Christmas time. You know, people's charging up credit card balances right now to give gifts here in 2 weeks. And so because of that, if they're holding a higher utilization on their credit card, their credit score is going to drop down slightly because of that. As soon as they pay that off, it's going to jump right back up. So does that mean that because someone has a high balance on a credit card that they're not worthy of receiving a loan? No, not in the least. You know, now if they have a 440 because they've filed for bankruptcy 3 times in the last 4 years, then yes, maybe we have some more to talk through, you know, when it comes to that. Or maybe they have collections and medical bills that might pop up. Doctors' offices are so quick to send patients to collections for something as simple as a $40 copay. You would be shocked at the number of times that I see that. And now, again, just like I asked the question about the credit card, does that mean that they're not credit worthy and that they're not going to repay the loan that we're going to give them? No, not in the least. And so behind these numbers, there's a conversation to be had, and there's a reason that the number is what it is. And so at the bank and any other bank that you go to, you know, you're going to have your credit pulled. We're going to look at it and say, okay, this is your number. You have a 720. This is why it's a 720. And this is what we can do for you. So let's kind of dive in here to what sort of is the makeup of this. So why our credit score is important, obviously, we've talked about that. That's what we use as a lender to be able to determine your credit worthiness and whether or not to lend you money. Nowadays, you can go out online and simply fill out a questionnaire. It'll ask you your first name, your last name, and your social security number. They're going to simply pull your credit, and then you'll get a pre-approval or an automatic denial on what they can do for you. And that's because so much weight is put into this number. And you know, if your credit gets pulled and you have a 815, well, then banks are going to line up down the street to talk to you, you know, because they know that for the last X number of years or X number of months that you've paid your bills on time, that you haven't had high utilizations, that you may not have a lot of debt at all. And so that in turn makes you look better on paper for an institution at that point. Yes, sure. Okay. 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 So the question that we had was, how does student loans affect your credit? And so student loans really on a credit report, they don't look any different from any other loan that you might have. They just simply show up as a term note. A term note is something that simply has a fixed number of years that you're paying the loan back. It's different than a credit card payment, where a credit card on your credit report is just going to show the balance on the credit card, and it's going to show your minimum payment on that credit card. It's not going to show, you know, what you've done the last couple of months on it. It's not going to show your utilization as far as how often you've paid it down. It's just going to show your balance, your max amount, and your minimum payment. So for a student loan, it's going to be similar to like a car loan. It's going to show, okay, well, what did this loan start out at? So if you started out with a student loan of $100,000, it's going to show your maximum amount that you started out at. It's going to show your current balance that the loan is at, and it's going to show your minimum payment. And one reason that that's kind of good to see the amount that it started out at, because if you started out at 100,000 and I see in your credit report that you've paid it down to 35, that's great. That means you've paid it for X number of years, you've made the payments on time, and it'll show the minimum payment that you're making on that. And the minimum payment is especially useful to us as lenders because we take that minimum payment and we're going to run that against your income. And then we're going to say, okay, so if your minimum payment is $500 a month on that, and you're bringing in $1,000 a month, well, unfortunately, that payment for that one loan is taking 50% of your income. And that's what we refer to as DTI, which is debt to income. And so typically when you go to apply for a mortgage, for example, the mortgage lender is going to want to see your debt to income ratio probably less than about 45%. So meaning that your total household income, you're not paying out more than 45% of that in bills. And now that does go off of your gross income. It's not your net. I know we'd all love to be paid off of our gross income, but life isn't like that today. So we have to go off of the net for what we actually take home, but they can be calculated off of the gross though, simply. And for a student loan though, as well, there are some programs specifically for student loans, because sometimes student loans could go into forbearance, where they can get forgiven. Depending on whatever type of program you're in, there are even some programs where if you go to school to be a nurse or a teacher or whatever have you, they may say, okay, well, you paid X number of years on this, you don't have to pay anymore. Or maybe if you're in law school, well, your payments on this loan actually doesn't start for like 5 years after you've started practicing law. So there's a lot that goes into that. So what I would do is not necessarily focus on the loan itself, because it's just going to be treated with the individual payment, but focus on, okay, what type of program are you in? Is it paying back normally? And have that conversation with your lender on that. So hopefully that answered the question. If not, feel free to let us know in the chat. We'll kind of move on to, so this is kind of a nice breakdown. This shows exactly, you know, what goes into that score, that 3-digit number that you're seeing, what goes into that. Okay. And so you can see a couple of different things on here. So your payment history factors into quite a bit of this. This is going to show, okay, well, how frequently do you make your payments? How often do you make them on time? We can actually see on credit reports that if you've been 30 days late X number of times, we can see if you've been 60 days late X number of times, we can see if you've been 90 days late X number of times. All those are very important for lenders because they want to know, okay, well, if this person has been 90 days late 20 times since this loan was originally done, that's kind of scary for us as lenders because we know then that we're probably going to be calling you every month saying, hey, where's that payment at? You know, and we don't want to have to do that. But that factors certainly into the score, you know, the 30, 60, 90, you hear that quite often, 30, 60, 90. And then the length of credit history factors into it slightly as well. It's unfortunate, but those that are younger and maybe just applied for their credit card last week and they've got it, their credit score isn't going to be as strong as someone that's had a credit card or a mortgage loan for 20 years. Doesn't make them a bad borrower by any means. It just means it's new credit. You haven't had it very long. And because of that, your credit score is a little bit weaker. And that's just simply because you don't have a track record to show, okay, well, I've had this credit card for 10 years. And anytime I've had a payment on it or I've had a balance on it, I've paid it off timely. So that doesn't make it bad. It just makes it where we may need to have some additional conversations, you know, or you may need a cosigner possibly for that, for someone that does have a long track record of having credit. Nothing wrong with that at all. It just means that we have to figure out how to get from A to B, and we may need to get creative in getting from A to B. And then once we get to B, then we could release a cosigner from having to be on there at you know, for a longer term or something, and then refinance at that point. Certainly new credit, as I mentioned, you know, that's tough. You see a lot of people when they get their first credit card or their first loan, they are having to have cosigners just because they don't have that history on there. Types of credit used. So this is a big one as well, and this can impact your store greatly. So you could have $150,000 mortgage on your credit report, and you could have a credit card for $10,000. If you have that credit card maxed out, that is actually going to impact your score more strongly than your $150,000 mortgage. And it simply is because if you have the credit card maxed out, that shows that you're utilizing all of your credit utilization. You're using 100% of it, so what does that mean then? That means to a lender that's looking at it, that means a couple things. That means that, okay, well, maybe you're living paycheck to paycheck and all you can afford is the minimum payments on this. So why would a new loan put you in a better position? You know, it makes it seem like maybe you don't have a lot of cash reserves, because if you had cash reserves, maybe you would have paid that credit card down a little bit instead of letting the balance rise up on it. And so utilization certainly impacts that quite a bit. Doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing. Again, it just makes it a conversation that needs to be had because it is greatly in reducing your credit score. I've seen credit scores where people have had fantastic payment history for 15 years. Everything's great, but they have 4 credit cards and every single one of them are maxed out. And their credit score is actually in the low 6s because of that. They've never missed a single payment, but because they're utilizing all of their available credit, it's dropping it down on them, which is unfortunate, but it's what we live with and we just have to work with it. And then, as I mentioned too, the amount owed, that kind of goes hand in hand with types of credit. So as you know, within the types, that's why I mentioned there's just a distinguishing difference between a term loan and a credit card. If it's a product that's supposed to revolve, like a credit card or a home equity line of credit or a regular line of credit, if it's supposed to revolve, you really need to revolve it. You need to charge it up and pay it down. You need to charge it up and pay it down, not just make those minimum payments every month. Because if you pay more and eliminate that, that's going to make your credit a lot stronger. I have seen credit scores. Yes. Yes. So her question in the back was, is business credit different from regular credit? And so when you say regular credit, you mean like personal credit? Yeah. So a business really doesn't have like a 3-digit score like an individual would. Businesses do have credit reports, and I put credit reports kind of in air quotes, because when a business comes to us for a loan, we can pull what's called a D&B report, which stands for Duns and Bradstreet. And so there's also another report that we can pull called LexisNexis. and a LexisNexis is going to be a report that it goes through the credit history of that particular business, and a D&B report is going to do the same thing as well. And it's going to tell us, okay, has the business ever had loans? Did they make those payments on time? How many loans do they have now? What do they have any liens against them? So it is going to tell us a lot of the similar information, but there's not really like a score per se. Like, it's not going to say your business has a 750 business score. Really, that's more on the personal side, but we can certainly pull all the information, and all that information is equally important on the business. However, if you're a new business, you may not have anything out there. If I will pull LexisNexis on a brand new business, I'm not going to see anything other than the fact that they registered in 2021. So there's just not a lot of history. Not a bad thing, just means that we need to talk about it more. So did that answer your question? Okay, great. We'll move on here to the next slide. So it says the credit report sample. Credit reports, though, all look different. This isn't necessarily like how the standard reports look, but it's going to have a breakdown of a lot of information on your history of credit. It's going to show every loan that you've had. It's going to show every credit card that you've had. It's going to show, as I mentioned earlier, the 30, 60, 90, if you've ever had late payments on something. It's going to show how long you've had it. It's going to show accounts that maybe are closed out. So maybe you opened up a belt card in 1999 to save 20% whenever you were checking out on a particular order. Well, maybe that card closed out in 2001. Well, it's still going to show in your credit report. Yeah, sure. Okay, so the question was, on a business credit report, do they go by your EIN number or your social security number? And so what really that is going to entail is how your business is set up. So if your business is set up with its own tax ID number, it's registered as like a S corporation or an LLC, then certainly there are going to be separations between that. So we would go off strictly the business information. However, if you're like a sole proprietor or you're a DBA of some sort, then we're probably going to search for that business using your personal information, because it's going to be based off of like your social security number, your personal address, everything, because basically you are the business. And in that event, it means even more for you to have strong personal credit because you are the business in that sense. Yeah, so a DBA stands for doing business as. And so so if I had a DBA, I would be Jordan Wooldridge doing business as Jordan's coffee shop, basically. And simply what that is that just means that my business is not registered as like a S corporation or something with the state of West Virginia. It's just a single member entity that I established on my own. Depending on the type of entity, it makes sense to do it that way. Other types, it makes sense to be more of an S corporation or an LLC. It's just all depends on what your business is and what you're doing actually for that. So. Okay. We can come back. If it pops in your head, just feel free to interrupt me. But what I was going to mention too was, it's old accounts that will also show on here as well. So we can see if you've had an older account that was closed off, paid off, and maybe you haven't made payments on it in 10 years, but we can still see it and see how your payment history was on that as well. One thing that I'll mention in this instance as well is, so if you have a loan and, maybe an auto loan, for example, so you've had the loan for say 5 years, you pay your car off. That's great. You paid it off. You're like, oh, this is wonderful. My credit's going to shoot up. You pull your credit the next month, it's dropped 15 points. You're like, why? So it's simply because an account on your credit report has been closed out. And a credit report doesn't distinguish holistically the difference between an account being closed out because maybe Macy's closed the card because you weren't using it, or because you closed out the auto loan because you paid off all the payments. You paid off all the principal on it, so you no longer have to pay it. So because of that, it causes your credit score to drop just slightly. However, then the next month when you look at it, it'll probably look even better than it did when the month that you actually had the auto loan. So it's going to take a little bit of fluctuation. Sometimes credit scores are a black hole in that sense, where it just makes you scratch your head and you're like, why is this a bad thing? It's not a bad thing. It just means that you basically eliminated one account that was on there, and now you have less accounts essentially to look at. So, yes. It will. Yeah. So her question was, will closed accounts stay on there? And yes, they will. Now, something really, really old may fall off eventually, especially if there's nothing still lingering with it, like there was no collections or anything that was out there for it. But yes, it will stay out there. And that's something good for us to see, because we can see that, okay, well, you had this mortgage back in 2015 and you paid it wonderfully. You never had a single 30-day late payment on it. It started out at $100,000 and you paid it all the way down to zero. That's great for us to see as lenders, because we can see that you've had credit before, you knew how to handle it, and you paid it off accordingly on that. So, yep. Okay. But this sample though is still good to kind of look at, because it does show you though ultimately what are on credit reports and what all we can see. So it's got your scores on there, it's got your addresses. Credit scores or credit reports also will have like prior addresses. So if you've lived somewhere else, all those addresses will follow you and feed into your credit report as well. Okay. So this is important kind of factors whenever you're looking at a credit report that you want to kind of touch on. These are things specifically that you want to be aware of going into a conversation with a lender like myself, because we're probably going to want to talk about it. Specifically, personal profile, address changes throughout the years, the credit summary. This is ultimately going to be, okay, well, you've had X number of credit accounts. You've paid all of them off. You paid them all that they should. There's been no late payments. So we can talk about that. We can go through those discussions, look at each individual account. If there was one, you would be shocked at the number of people in 2020 that had mortgages, and they called their banks and they're like, hey, I'm not working right now. I'm not getting paid, or I am getting paid, but we're having to now spend money on this, where I'm working from home. And so now I'm having to pay for childcare outside the home, whatever have you. But so they call their banks and they're like, I want to do a forbearance on my mortgage. So what a forbearance is basically meaning I don't want to make my payments for the next 2 or 3 months. Can you kind of freeze it? Well, a couple things that's not great in that is when you do a forbearance, it simply puts those payments to the end of that 3-month period. So as soon as that forbearance ends, so if you foregoed making your October, November, and December mortgage payments, well, come January, your payment's going to look a lot bigger because you're going to have to get caught up. You're going to make all those payments. So at Truist, actually, we tried to have conversations with people and say, look, do you know what you're asking for? Do you really want a forbearance? Because what happens during that 3 months? In theory, all that money should be going into savings, but life happens. So the money that you would have made on your mortgage payment, maybe you had an unexpected hospital bill, or maybe you had to buy a lot more food because now nobody's leaving the house. so your grocery bill is shot up. And so at the end of that 3 months, people didn't have the money to be able to get caught up on those mortgages. So what does that look like on their credit report? Well, it doesn't look good. It looks like that they didn't make their mortgage payment. And then they have a 30-day and a 60-day and a 90-day late. I have seen it time and time again. And really on credit reports, if we see anything from 2020, we're having conversations about it because there might be a lot of noise behind the way that it looks, essentially, in that sense. Does anybody have any questions related to that?
On the addresses.
Yes.
Is it true? Someone told me that credit score. If I have 10 addresses, I was told that you should take some of them off. Have some of them removed.
Yeah. So her question, in case it wasn't heard on the call, it was if you have quite a few addresses listed on your credit report. Is it negative? Should you have those removed? Whatever. I would say that no, it really doesn't negatively impact you. If anything, if I would see out there that you had 15 addresses, I may ask you, well, what's going on? Are you like Thelma and Louise? You're running across the country, running from something, hiding from creditors, so we may want to have a conversation about it to be like, okay, well, are you staying here, or are you leaving again next month to go to another city? And then, then we'll have to worry about it. So it's not necessarily something that's going to negatively impact your credit score, but it is going to probably spur a conversation to be had. So, yeah, but I wouldn't worry about eliminating them. And with that, so if you would go to eliminate an address on a credit report, that kind of opens up a little can of worms here that I'll kind of venture down this. So there are so many companies out there nowadays that they will offer to remove addresses from your credit report, or they'll offer to remove collections that may still be out there, or old loans that are showing up, or past due accounts. So they'll offer just to simply help you. Be very careful with these companies, because these companies, they don't care about your credit score. They do not care. And some of them, whenever you pull your credit, or whenever they pull your credit, they'll even artificially lower your credit to make it look worse than it really is. So that way you get more motivated to pay them monthly. I have seen people pay hundreds of dollars a month to these credit fix companies, and they promise to make their score a 750 by the end of the year. Well, guess what? It's not going to happen, because they're going to keep you on their payroll, so that way you can keep sending them money every month in hopes that something will change with your credit. It's not that complex, not that complex. Have a conversation with me about it. I'll tell you how to fix your credit and I won't even charge you for it. But I just wanted to mention that, because there are so many of those companies nowadays that they see people and they know that, okay, maybe you're wanting to buy a truck next month. So you're very motivated to make sure that your credit score looks really good next month when you're wanting to buy a truck. So what are you going to do? You're going to do anything in your power to make sure that your credit looks good. And that would mean possibly writing a check with a lot of zeros behind it to get the help that you might need. So any questions about that? Okay. The credit inquiries. So this is a biggie too. This is something that comes up quite often. When your credit is pulled, people always ask, is this going to hurt my credit? Is this going to hurt my credit when it gets pulled? Hurt is probably a strong term. Will it cause your credit to fluctuate a couple points? Yes. Every time a bank pulls your credit, it means, and it's going to show too. So if I pull your credit today and you look at your credit report tomorrow, you're going to see where Truist Financial Corporation pulled your credit on December, what is today, 13th. It will cause it to fluctuate a couple points. You may see it 3, 4, 5, 6 points. Will it bounce back? Absolutely, it'll bounce back. It just simply means it's another telltale sign for lenders, and kind of almost like a breadcrumb trail, by saying, okay, has this person been to 15 different lenders in the last week looking for a loan?
Okay,
Yeah. Yes.
So that's like when you go buy a car.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're checking like
Yes.
5 different places to find the lowest
Yes.
rate and all that.
Yes. There is, yes. And so her question was, when you go to a car dealership, we call it the BB gun effect, because what does that dealer want to do? They want to sell you that car. And so they don't care about your credit score. What they want to do is they want to send it out to 15 different lenders and see what comes back. And then that way they can come to you and say, well, okay, here's your options. We can get you this rate, interest rate. We can get you this interest rate with this payment. And two, if you're a buyer that maybe you go in and you're like, I want to get the lowest payment I can. Well, then they're going to send it out and see, okay, well, who can get us a 72-month term? Who can get us an 84-month term for this auto loan for this lady? And so, yes, that is very bad on your credit when you see that. And so what I typically do, me and my wife, we bought a vehicle back in, I think it was August. So what we did prior to going to the dealership, I'm a car guy anyway, so I kind of already knew a lot of the, I knew how much I wanted to pay for the car, yada yada. But what I did though before we went there, obviously I work at Truist, so it's a little bit easier for me. But whoever your bank is, go to that bank and say, okay, I think I'm going to be buying a car tomorrow that's going to cost $30,000. Can I go ahead and apply for an auto loan today for this car? And then that way, if you apply and you get approved for that auto loan, you simply go to the dealership and you tell them you'll buy that car. And when they ask you about financing, say, I've already got it. It's done. Don't worry about them. They're going to do their own thing. And then that way, your bank then can simply just send them a check or send them a wire, whatever have you. So you've already taken care of your financing on the front end. You can even go to dealerships. I've seen people go to dealerships and they're like, don't send my credit out to everybody. Do you think they're really going to do that? So just try to get it done before you get into the purchase. And not to mention, and this really has nothing to do with credit necessarily, but like I said, I'm a car guy, so I'm going to throw this advice out anyways too. So whenever you go to buy a car and you get to the end stages when you're sitting there with the finance guy and everything, and he's trying to sell you all these warranties, he's trying to sell you this warranty so that in case a lava hits the top of your car, that it'll protect your paint, and it only costs 24 payments of $250, which so it makes your payment go up by X amount. Well, if you've already got your financing kind of situated, then you're not going to buy anything else, because you can tell him like, look, this check right here that I brought from my bank, this is what, if you go above this, then I'm not buying this car. So just my advice for that though. So, but yeah, credit inquiries though certainly impacts your credit. It really does. Like I said, it'll bounce back. Like it doesn't necessarily, it won't leave you at a 50 basis point reduction on it, but it will show the history. And that's why I say earlier too, if someone comes to me and we pull their credit and it's like, well, they've been to First Community, they've been to City National, they've been to MCMB all within the same week. Well, then my thought is, well, what is everybody else telling them no? And I'm here as their last resort. That makes me wonder, okay, well, what am I about to look at then? Is this business not making any money, or does this person have a really bad credit score that maybe, so it just kind of shows, like I said, kind of like a breadcrumb trail in that sense. So any other questions related to that in particular? Okay. And then account history too. This is one of the most important things on it. It just shows your history of your loans, your credit cards, your revolving lines of credit, everything that's out there. It shows your history of them. Have you made the payments on time? Have you paid it down significantly? Or have you refinanced it every year to keep kicking the can down the road? It tells us a lot of good information about that, and it's good to know. Okay, ways to establish credit. So there's really not a good way to say, okay, well, this is what you should first do. You should first go out and get a credit card. That's not for everybody. Some people going out and getting a credit card to establish credit, they end up having that sucker maxed out in 30 days. So not only have they established credit, they've established credit and they've killed their credit in the same month. So really, it all depends on the individual person. Now, for me personally, when I established credit, I went to the bank with my dad and we got a credit card together, and I had it through while I was in college, and I charged it up and paid it down, charged it up and paid it down. Now my dad was on there, and so I was less likely to buy and max it out for what I wanted to buy. So, you had a little bit of oversight when it comes to that sense. But, for other people, it could be getting your first auto loan, going out and buying a car and making the payments. So what if you have to get a cosigner? Just because you have a cosigner on something doesn't mean that it looks any less different on your credit report. It still looks exactly the same. And it still helps you build credit the same exact way. A lot of people have to get cosigners. Doesn't make you a bad borrower. It just means that maybe you're new. Maybe you don't have a lot of credit. That's all that it simply means in that sense. But that is certainly two major ways that you see people establishing credit. Once you get out there and you start having something showing up, you have a payment monthly showing, You know, that's whenever it starts building a score and building a stronger score the longer that you do that and the earlier that you do that too. So that is a good way. Utility bills, they can even flow through to your credit report, you know, especially if you don't pay them. They can send you to collections, and then next thing you know, you see under the certain section on your credit report, it'll say Mountaineer Gas Company. You know, but you know that's certainly a way to establish it, but it's also a way to ruin it as well. But the last thing here, though, it says to maintain your credit. You know, don't use a credit repair company. I mentioned that earlier because those companies aren't out to help you; they're out to help themselves. Don't miss or ignore payments. You know, just because you missed a payment doesn't mean that maybe you didn't have the money. You could have forgot about it. You know, which in a sense that shouldn't hurt you. You know, that you forgot about it. I myself personally have been driving down the road before. I'm like, shoot, my Truist credit card was due yesterday. You know, I'm going my online banking. You know, trying to process and you know, there's a lot of companies that'll give you a grace period. So they're not going to report it, you know, automatically that you're 2 days late, you know. Yeah.
Okay, so for business, if I can't get it by myself, and if I get a cosigner, they're going to wonder, well, is it going to affect them the exact same way it's going to affect my business if it's not paid for? Or
yes. And so her question was, yeah. I get what you mean. So her question is related to cosigner, and is a cosigner basically on the hook as much as you are for it? And the short answer to that is yes. So they are equally on there. It'll show up on their credit report just as it would yours. I sometimes will see people come to me for a loan for their business, and I'll see something related to something they're co-signing for somebody else. And in a sense, it's good to have that conversation with them, because in theory, what I can do is I can back out that payment and say, okay, well, that's not necessarily something that you're directly responsible for month to month. Someone else is making sure that this is getting paid. So we can kind of put that on the back burner and say, okay, well, this is getting paid from this. This is your business, so we're going to look at this business. So yes, it is equal. And that's a lot of times some people don't understand what they're getting into when they are being a cosigner. And it's sad because then you see people take advantage of that, and then they just walk out on the loan, and the cosigner is the one left, you know, really seeing the damage off of it. So any other questions or anything like that? One thing I'll mention too, I just noticed it here on this middle section. So under the rebuilding credit section, the last one there that you see, open a secured loan or a credit card. So a lot of banks, us included, will offer a secured credit card. And what that is it's a credit card that is for someone that may have not so great credit, may have new credit, whatever have you, but you can essentially put money into a savings account. We'll take a hold on that savings account and use that as collateral for the credit card or for the loan that you're getting. And it's a great way to build credit, because does it look any different on your credit report? No, it doesn't look a bit different. It looks just like any other loan or credit card that you get, but it gives the banker to knowing, okay, well, if they have this secured credit card and they max it up to $500 and then just walk away from it, we've got $500 set in this account, so we can pay. It's not much risk to the bank in that sense. And it's a great alternative if maybe you're someone that doesn't have a cosigner. Maybe you're sitting there thinking, I know nobody that would be willing to go on the hook for me for this. Well, that's whenever we look at, you know, collateral securing things like that of that nature. Gives the bank a lot more comfortability in that. So any questions on that? Okay. This is just tips for using it responsibly. So, you know, we've talked about this a little throughout the presentation as well, but, you know, definitely keeping track of what you've got. You know, I've seen a lot of people that they may have 6 credit cards because they've opened them up at every store in town. You know, I know every time you go to TJ Maxx, you can't leave there without getting asked if you want to apply for a TJ Maxx Rewards credit card. My wife has 2 of them. I don't even know how that happens. But you know, certainly know what you've got. And if you put something on a credit card, don't forget about it. because that's your credit score on the line. So keep track of that. It mentions keeping a budget, utilize whatever you have that you're looking at daily, whether it's a journal or a Microsoft Excel or Word or simply the notes in your cell phone, and itemize that out and say, okay, well, I've got my American Express, I've got my Visa, and these are when the payments are due. And that way, every month you can look at that and you can know, okay, well, this is the 15th of the month. Did I go out and process that payment to this note? Because that really can impact you if you don't remember that until the 15th of the next month. And if you have several coming through, maybe you mix them up. I mean, it happens to the best of us in that sense. So just know what you've got, because it can definitely slip away from you. You don't want that to happen, because as hard as it is to get good credit, it's very easy to ruin it. And so you work very hard for what you've got and to get what you have. And so you definitely want to try to sustain that if you can. Also, to save for larger purchases instead of using credit. This is a great one too, because, say we'll just use a car, for example, on this. So, if you have a credit card that has a $10,000 limit on it, which is a pretty good limit for a credit card, you may have a car that you want to buy for $5,000. Should you go buy that car on that credit card? No, not at all. Two things. One, the interest rate on that credit card is going to be astronomical in comparison to the auto loan. And two, you're putting a high balance on that credit card that otherwise should have been paid off at the end of the month. So your utilization on your credit report is going to be pretty high. It's going to be 50% on that one account. And so what you should do then is, as it says, save. So save your money, go pay cash for that $5,000 car, or just finance it and get an auto loan. And then you have a monthly principal and interest payment that you're making, and it doesn't negatively impact your credit at the end of the day on that. And then the last one too is reviewing your credit report annually, so you know exactly what's on it. And this is a biggie too. You don't necessarily have to pull your credit. I know a lot of banks nowadays, I know ours does this. If I log into my online banking, every month it refreshes with my credit score out there. Now, it doesn't mean that Truist is pulling my credit every month. What it is that it's a soft pull, that it basically is just going off of my social security number. So it's not a hard pull every single month that it's doing it. But I can look at that and know, okay, well, this is the ballpark of where my credit's at this month. That way, if one month when I would look at that and if it would drop down to 550, and I'm like, well, what happened? What did I forget about? But definitely reviewing it every year. It's almost like a checkup for yourself. You got to worry about your health every year and going to the doctor. Worry about your credit too. You got to know where it's at, where it stands. That also too, identity theft. Identity theft, it has nothing to do with you, but it can absolutely ruin your credit. Somebody could go get a loan in another state in your name, never make a single payment on it, and you may have no idea until you go to buy a home, and that mortgage lender is sitting across the desk from you saying, your credit's 600, and it says here that you let this loan charge off that you got in Arkansas a year ago. And you're like, well, that's the first I've heard of it. You don't want to have to be figuring that out whenever you're trying to do a big life moment like purchasing a home or something, because that can greatly reduce your chance of getting that or even keep you from getting that. So, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. So her question is how would identity theft in particular, how does identity theft impact your credit? And so unfortunately, identity theft is one of those things where right out of the gate, it's going to pretty negatively impact your credit. And it's not going to look great because it's showing that something negative has happened. And it's really just like anything in this world. Unfortunately, we're proven guilty until we're otherwise proven innocent. And so, if I have identity theft on my credit report and it shows that I got a loan a year ago that I didn't know about, and I go to buy a home, Well, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not going to be able to buy it, but I'm going to have a lot of conversations. I'm going to need to dig into that and say, okay, well, where did this happen? You know, who did it happen with? You know, do I need to file a police report? Do I need to do this? Do I need to go find out, you know, was it a relative? Because that happens too. The people closest to us, they're going to slip a credit card out of your purse. The next thing you know, they're gone.
Credit.
Yeah.
And it hits you up every time.
Yep.
On my phone.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Having something like that is kind of like it's almost like having a watchdog over you. You know, anytime a new credit account is opened in your name, you're notified about it. You're getting an email if somebody you don't even know is sitting in the lobby of a bank 3 states over trying to apply for a loan in your name. And you're going to get an email saying, hey, are you doing this? And if you are, great. You just mark that you are. If not, stop it before it happens.
And it can freeze it.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. No, it does not. There's a lot that they're designed just to kind of monitor of new accounts. So like I have a Discover card, for example, and Discover does monthly monitoring as well, kind of like Credit Karma. I'll get an email every month saying there's no new accounts under your social security number for this month. Or I'll get an email saying there was, like when me and my wife bought a car back in August, I got an email the following month saying, hey, there was one new account now listed under your social security number. Did you do this? You know, so then I can log in and say, okay, it was from this, you know, and this and this. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. You know, but to your question though, too. So how do you deal with that? If it's already happened and there's no way to prevent it from happening, just have a conversation. You know, so go to that lender that you're working with. If you're in the midst of trying to do something and you realize at the last second, say, look, this was identity theft. I wasn't responsible for this. And if that's the only blemish that's on your credit report, you know, if you've had great repayment history for everything else, it can be worked through. It's not something that's going to haunt you for the rest of your life that you're never going to be able to get out from underneath of. Just have a conversation and say, look, this wasn't me. This was identity theft. And if you have a police report, keep all documentation with it to show that you truly went through the steps to prove that it wasn't you. And that's great. So. Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So like for me, for example, when I get notified by Discover for something like that, what I can do is I can log into my Discover account and it'll tell me the name of the new account that is now listed under my social security number. And so if I recognize it, great, I move on. If I go on there and I'm like, I don't know what bank that was, you know, then my first instance would probably be to contact that bank and say, hey, can you look and see if there's something under my name or my social and tell me what it is, you know, and then hopefully you're kind of ahead of the curve in that sense. And then they can be like, oh yeah, there's a loan here. You were in here last week doing this. I'm like, no, I wasn't. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And then with the dispute as well. So if you can dispute something and truly prove that it wasn't you, eventually it can get removed from your credit report. Yep. So it is possible to get it fully removed and cleaned off at that point. So not fun to deal with. And unfortunately nowadays it is happening so often. It is so often. That's why we just have to be careful. That's why honestly, I don't recommend people writing physical checks nowadays, because then people can hack into your accounts because they'll have your account number and your routing number. You got to be careful where you use your credit card at. My wife yesterday alone, she has an Apple card, and an Apple card is supposed to be very safe in theory because it doesn't even have the numbers on the card, and the security code is changing every day. Like she pulls up her phone and it shows a new card. Well, it got attempted to use twice yesterday. Once in Bloomingdale's for like $800. I called her. I said, What are you doing? Yeah, is this for me? If it's for me, then it's fine. But luckily though, it popped up on her phone and it notified her, and she was able to respond back and say, "No, this isn't me." And so that transaction got rejected. Had it not gotten rejected and it posted, we could have still disputed it after the fact. But you just got to try to keep an eye on things and try to do everything you can to protect yourself, because now, honestly, we're still scratching our heads today. Like, how did they get this card? Because it doesn't make any sense. We don't know, like, is her phone hacked? Did they get into her laptop? Did they intercept a bill through the mail? You never know nowadays. So, yeah, very. Mm-hmm. I think it's my free credit report, or my free annual credit report.com, I think.
It's at annualcreditreport.com.
Annualcreditreport.com. Okay.
And it's listed in the chat box. And I've also put a link to disputing errors on your credit report in the chat box.
There you go. Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have followed you. Matter of fact, a couple of days ago, I
Mm-hmm.
had an incident and bank fraud
Mm-hmm.
called me.
Yeah.
And I had to question the fraud department if they are the fraud.
Right.
Yes.
Scary part.
Yeah.
She did not say them. She was continuing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
just how it is, because I was dealing with the
Yes.
situation.
Yep. Exactly. Yep. 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 Mm-hmm.
So forth. So
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that you
Mm-hmm.
have from you that
Mm-hmm.
I had a question on
Mm-hmm.
is credit card versus charge card.
Mm-hmm.
What is, and for instance, like Home Depot, Lowe's,
Yes.
versus regular credit card.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I know quite often the interest rate
Mm-hmm.
is quite different.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm at a point now that I'm balancing my cash.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting down cash.
Yep.
I don't want my card to get too high.
Mm-hmm.
Because really you don't see the payment even when you're making it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, is there a major difference other than the percentage of a credit card versus charge card?
Yeah. So his question is difference between a credit card and a charge card. And so there is a difference with that. So American Express, if you get a business credit card through American Express, it is primarily going to be a charge card. And so what a charge card is a charge card is really meant as a transactional need. So you charge it up and then you pay it right back down. There's really not supposed to be much utilization and revolving with something like that. It's meant to be used, paid down to zero, and move on to the next transaction. A credit card is more for something where, you can purchase something or you purchase supplies, and then you can pay that credit card off as you sell your product and then pay that back down to zero, almost like a line of credit. Charge cards typically have a little bit of higher interest rate on that for that example, because that's their way of discouraging you of holding a balance on there. Is because if you do hold a balance, you're going to pay a lot more for it than you would for a credit card, and credit card interest rates are already high anyways. So charge cards are just that much more too, in a sense. And charge cards are also more for like commercial needs. So you might see like, a company that has a fleet of vehicles. Well, they give all their drivers gas cards. So those are all individual charge cards that's used by all those drivers. They charge them up, pay them back down at the end of the month then at that point. So.
Is it true that you can avoid interest rate?
As far as on like a credit card or something? Yes. Yeah. So if you go off and you pay like your statement balance, and Apple's actually pretty good. We were talking about an Apple card earlier. Apple will actually tell you, okay, if you pay X amount this month, then you won't have any interest that's going to accrue on it, because it's going to accrue off of your new charges and off of your balance on that. So if you pay a significant amount on that, usually it's like the statement balance, then you can avoid getting quite a bit of interest charges on that. So, okay. Mm-hmm. Yes. So the question in the chat is why are different credit scores, or why are credit scores different? And so there are three major credit reporting agencies. You have TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian are your three major companies that you see. Typically on the commercial side for me, we pull kind of an average of all three of them because they are all three different. And they all kind of, because of that, the reason behind that is because they kind of look at different things. So one may focus more on like utilization, whereas the other one may focus more on like prior credit history. And certain and different companies too have different criteria. Like they may be more harshly towards a new credit, whereas someone that's had it for a longer amount of time. So it's unfortunate because it's kind of confusing too in a way. You're like, why can't there just be one standard credit reporting agency? I agree with you. I think it's very confusing. However, if your credit's pretty good on one reporting agency, then typically it's going to be pretty good on the other two as well. They're not going to be too different on that sense. And then as far as like you mentioned, the question mentioned the car loan as well. So it all depends on where you're going. So some companies may solely pull TransUnion. Others may look at only Equifax. It just depends on who they have a partnership with and who they're traditionally using and who their banks are using. And that's who they're, excuse me, that's who they're going to go through for that particular credit report then for that sense. So fortunately, it's kind of inconsistent though. Mm-hmm.
I know you talked about minimum credit score.
Yeah.
Such as below what is max? Is there a max now?
Yeah. So typically you see max of like 850 usually is like the high end of, where it is. But, the thing though to focus on is the slide mentioned like 670. But if it's below that, it doesn't mean that's bad by any means. It might just be lower because you have higher balances. And if you have higher balances, then maybe we need to talk about a debt consolidation loan, to where we take all that credit card debt, put it on a term loan, and then that'll make your credit report shoot up because your utilization of your revolving accounts has now dropped down significantly. So just keep that in mind.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know what I want to ask, but
Mm-hmm.
if I'm looking at a business loan,
Mm-hmm.
is it going to have a great impact on my personal in the future?
Mm-hmm.
It's still going to have that same 20% or 10%, all that, right?
So you're saying as far as like impacting your personal credit?
Yes.
Yes. And so, yeah. And so her question was, does business credit impact your personal credit if you're mingling them basically? And so the short answer to that is yes. So it also though, I shouldn't say yes, it depends. And the reason I say depend is, okay, so traditionally, if you come to me for like a truck loan, for example,
Right.
and you had an established business that's had 10 years of track record and everything's great, everything's normal, I would make the business the primary borrower on that loan. And then I would make you, as the owner of that business, a guarantor. If you're just a guarantor on a loan, it's not going to show on your personal credit report if the business is the one that the debt is in. Now, if you come to me and you're a newer business and we may, there's no track record to go off of, we don't have a lot of consistent reports to show, okay, well, the business has done this well for this number of years, then we may want to start out and say, okay, well, let's make you a co-borrower with the business. Not a bad thing, not a bad thing by any means. It's just a way for us to kind of say, okay, well, if you're wanting this loan, we may need you to go on there with the business. So in that sense, if you're a co-borrower, then it would show on your personal credit report at that point. Yeah. And then there's also some caveats too. If you're like a sole proprietor, well, the debt can really only be in your name because the business really isn't its own entity. You are the entity essentially in that sense. So, but if you're an LLC or a corporation or something, then you can distinguishably separate the two then at that point. So, yep. Now, that's a good question because I see a lot of businesses come to me that, you know, maybe when they were first starting out, the business owners had to be a co-borrower on everything because they were new, they started out. So they come to me, you know, 5 years after they've established then, and they're like, can we separate this? So what I do then is I take that debt that they've already got and I make the business the primary borrower, and then I push them back to being guarantors. So then it frees up their personal credit utilization. And then when they go to buy a home, for example, or something, it doesn't show that they have $5,000 in monthly payments that they're not actually making. The business is the one making them. So, yeah, good question though. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just a difference. So it really depends on the type of business that it is. I usually always encourage people to set up some form of an LLC at least. You know, if it's rental property or if it's a food truck, and the reason for that too is because if you are the business, so if it's a DBA and you are the business and there's, you know, no entity out there, say I'm coming over, you know, to your food truck or something, for example, I'm standing there, you pour hot oil out on me out the window, and then I'm like, well, I'm going to sue you. Well, if you're the business, I'm suing you personally. If you have an LLC in place, then you've got kind of a shield of legal protection in front of you where I can't go after your personal assets because they're protected. Only thing I can go after is the business. And so I have a lot of like rental property clients, for example, that I tell them the same exact thing. You know, they come to me and they're like, should I buy this rental house in my personal name? Well, do you want that tenant to slip on the front porch on ice and then sue you personally? And then the next thing you know, they're living in your personal home? No. Establish yourself an LLC in that sense. So that's my really only kind of, I guess, encouragement for that, was just to protect yourself. But also too, it's going to come down to an accounting standpoint. So talk to your trusted financial advisor, you know, talk to your accountant, talk to your attorney, whoever you have that you talk to this stuff about, and ask them, say, my business that I've got, would it make sense to have an LLC, or should I stay as a sole proprietor? Should I be an S corporation or a C corporation? And definitely communicate with them, and they'll advise you on what you need to do, because there's tax advantages to all of them too as well. So. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. So her question is if you started out as one type of establishment and you want to transition to the other, completely fine. I see businesses that they started out a certain way because maybe somebody advised them to do that. And it made sense, but 5 years later, the business kind of has changed a little bit, and they realized that they didn't want to be liable for this type of taxation, or, you know, and so they reestablished later as a different type. That's perfectly fine. It can be done simply just through the West Virginia Secretary of State. So. Let's see here. This slide is about just controlling your debt, but we've kind of talked about this a little bit in a way. You know, certainly don't think of a credit card, and you all know this in this room, a credit card and debit card are two different things. Don't, just because you have the availability on your credit card doesn't mean you should buy it. Realistically, if you don't have the amount on your checking account that you're about to make a purchase for on your credit card, you shouldn't be buying it probably. Now, businesses sometimes looks at it a little bit differently, because if you're thinking, well, in order to make a profit, I've got to buy these supplies, so I may not have that money right now. However, if you're confident that, you know, your sales are then going to support you to pay that off, then that's fine. That's what a charge and credit account is supposed to be for. It's supposed to be utilized, because you're buying, you know, the paper towels and the cups and the plates from Sam's Club, but you're hoping that you're going to serve enough food on those that's going to be able to pay off the credit that you've built up and the balances that you've built up, and then have profit on top of that. So sometimes it's necessary. Otherwise it's not, but it just depends on the situation. Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so an unsecured card versus a secured card. So typically most credit cards are unsecured. There's no collateral attached to them whatsoever, except for you personally. And simply your name is on the hook, basically just saying if you quit making the payments on this, then that credit card company is going to go after you personally and hurt your credit. Secured, there's cash collateral on the line for that you're saying that if you quit making the payments on this, and that bank can liquidate that. As far as how it reports to your credit, really there's no difference. They both can help you or hurt you in the same way, essentially, from a credit reporting standpoint. Yeah. And, if you start out with a secured credit card, maybe after a year of having that, you can go back to your bank and say, hey, I've made my payments on time. Can we shift this over to a different type of credit card? Yeah, by all means, do that. A secured credit card is simply a vehicle to get you from here to here a little bit easier. So, controlling your debt. This is just kind of a continuation off of our last slide here. Certainly don't spend more than you make, and keep tabs on everything that you have. Make a budget. Prepare monthly profit and loss statements so that you can see where you're at, because as a business owner, you're busy. You're very, very busy. You're doing what you need to do every day to make money, but you got to sometimes slow down and say, well, is what I'm doing making sense? Am I making money, or am I purely just hemorrhaging it every month? And then you get to the end of the year and you're like, my goodness, I've spent more than I've made this year. Well, is it worth it? Or should you change up what you're doing? So that's why I say have a financial advisor that you trust, or a good financial accounting system. I can't really recommend one over the other, but just some sort of simple ledger where you're tracking what all's going on. So that way, at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month or year, you know where things are standing, and you're not going to have a surprise at the end of the year. Benefits of paying down your debt. Certainly it's great to pay the debt down for many reasons. You pay it off, you own the truck, you own the equipment, you own your home, you own it all with no debt on it. That's fantastic. If you have a house and maybe you don't have anything owed against it and you're wanting to start a business, well, you can utilize that house to then get money out of your home to help support the business if you want to. A lot of good advantages from that sense. You can get a home equity line of credit. A lot of good advantages though to having minimal downtime limit, other than the fact that it's also going to make your credit score look really good. Any questions on any of that? That's an easy one, pretty much. Resources to help. So Marla, the one websites you can go to pull your annual credit report. But there's also a lot of other good resources online in various banks. Banks, I know our bank, for example, we try to be a trusted advisor with people. We want to have conversations with you. I had a client last week that they left me a review. We do reviews and stuff now, and they left me a review, and they said, he doesn't always say what we want to hear. But we like him, and they gave me 10s out of 10. And I take pride in that, because I don't always tell them what they want to hear. They may come to me and say, hey, I want to go buy this new F-350, and they want to trade in their F-250 for it because they think they need a bigger truck. Okay, well, let's look at your financials. Can you support this? It's going to be a little thin. Okay, well, do you need it now? Maybe we wait till the spring and we look at this again, and then at that point you can really say, okay, well, I need this and I can also afford it now. So, you want to have someone that's going to be honest with you, because everybody would love to run out and buy the new big shiny truck because they think that people's going to come purchase more from them if it looks better on the outside. If you serve a good product, the business is going to come anyways. So.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
When you're checking on your credit and you have some discrepancy, and it's dropped after 7 years?
Yes. Yep.
And if say it's been on there for 3 years, and I write a letter, disputing it or whatever.
Yep.
I've been told that your 7 years start all over again. Is that true?
No, and one thing I'll say too is there are certain things on credit reports that do stay on there for X number of time, like a bankruptcy, for example, it'll stay on there for 7 years. That doesn't mean that you can't walk into a bank for 7 years. There are mortgage programs that are actually designed where after 2 years, you can go back in and get a mortgage. And if you can show that you've made good payments for that 2 years, you qualify. Just because that bankruptcy may stay out there for the additional 5 doesn't mean that you're disqualified. Same way with my side on the commercial side. You know, we can still have a conversation and say, look, I've had this conversation with several clients. You know, they're like, look, this happened to me back in 2020. Things were tough. You know, we didn't know what we were going to do. This was our only way to basically keep from losing our home, you know, to keep the business afloat, is we had to file for bankruptcy. Sometimes you got to do that. You know, there are certain things that, you know, you got to, maybe you have children you're trying to protect, whatever. But, you know, we can have a conversation around that and figure out, okay, what happened? How did you get there? And what have you done since then? You know, and that's what matters most. And that's what we need to talk about. So.
Okay, you talked about equity out of your home.
Mm-hmm.
You're in West Virginia, you have a lot of mobile homes.
Mm-hmm.
Can you get one against mobile homes?
Mm-hmm. Can
you get one against regular home? And what's collateral?
Yep. So we can consider all types of collateral as long as we don't have to water or feed it. And so from yes. So ideally, so if you come to me and you're like, I want to get a business loan and I want to talk about this. I've got my home. I don't know anything against my home. Can we take it as collateral? So you mentioned mobile homes as an example. So traditionally, per like different government programs that we utilize, and the mortgage is the same way on this. If it's a mobile home, it just has to be on a fixed foundation. It has to be on the cinder blocks around it. You can't still have the tongue on the front of it. And purely the reason for that is, you know, you got to remove the wheels. It's just so the bank knows that you're not going to hook it up and move it somewhere, you know, is all that it is. Because at that point, it's considered a motor vehicle. But we can certainly consider those as collateral. And honestly, if a business owner comes to me and they're offering their home as collateral, that's a very noble thing in my eyes, because that to me tells me that you have faith in your business. You know, that you know that it's going to survive, because if it doesn't survive, your home's on the line. You know, I have some people then on the other hand that they'll come to me and they're like, I don't want to be a guarantor on this loan. I don't want to be a co-borrower on here. I'm not offering any of my personal assets. And I'm like, well, I guess I have more faith in your business than you do. You know, so we can take equipment, we can do vehicles, you know what, land. Well, land is different. So if you come to me and you're like, I want to buy this piece of land because I ultimately want to build a building on it, then we can finance both the land and the building that you're going to occupy. However, if you come to me and you're like, I've got this piece of land, I just want to get a loan against it, might not be able to do that. That's a little tough when it comes to that sense. But however, if it's for purpose and development, then we can do that. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can, as long as you have flood insurance on it. Yeah. Some companies don't write in certain areas of West Virginia. I'm battling that right now. Actually, I'm trying to help one of my clients. He's in, can't think of the area that it's in actually right now. But yeah, the flood companies are not writing. They're saying we're not doing that area, you know. And so what we have then, we have our own internal flood insurance group. And so they're actually writing the policy on it. And so they were able to do it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. It is. We do. And a lot of banks, they may have their own insurance resources internally. Because ultimately you may have your larger insurance carriers that are like, we can't do that in that area. However, at the end of the day, insurance can be written anywhere. It just depends on who you go through. And unfortunately, your premium may be a little higher because of that, you know, but you know, if it's only a short-term loan, you don't have to keep flood insurance on it for that long. You know, maybe it's only a 3-year loan. So you only have 3 years worth of premiums that you have to pay on that. So, and in that sense too, we may want to be like, okay, well, Do you have other collateral that we could look at? You know, that way it's not going to be as expensive for you to use that, you know, something that's not in a floodplain or something, for example. So just conversations. Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. This is just another slide here with just some additional external resources. Feel free to, you know, use any of these resources. Use me. I'll leave my contact information as well. Marlo on the call. We're here to help, you know, or whoever you bank with, just simply walk in, I'm sure, and sit down, have a conversation with somebody and tell them what your goals are at the end of the day. Yes. So I primarily, my primary office is in Beckley. I'm at the Truist location right on Robert C. Byrd Drive across from Hobby Lobby. But then I am in Princeton usually a day a week at the Stafford Drive office. So you can find me about anywhere.
Do we have that in this?
That is a good question. Yes, you do. It's on page 45, it looks like. So, did you have one more question too? Yep, we absolutely do. We have all varieties. She asked if Truist in particular did business lending and deposits, and we do. We have business savings accounts, business checking accounts. We can look at business lines of credit, business loans, all the whole gamut. So
How different are they than personal?
It's about, it depends on what you do though. You know, interest rates right now are obviously a little bit higher. They've gone up over the last couple of months significantly, and they may be going up again today. The Fed's supposed to meet tomorrow and release some reports today, so it could impact it again, which in turn causes, if you have credit cards, those rates also go up with those. But, you know, certainly though, from a fee standpoint, it depends on what you're doing. So if you're doing something with real estate, obviously it's going to be a little more expensive because you got to do an appraisal, you got to do surveys, you got to do all the legal work associated with all the title work. You know, several things entailed in that. However, if it's just like a simple auto loan, it's usually fees are comparable to what you would get on a personal auto loan at that point. So.
I just want to make a comment.
Yeah.
I said I had a meeting. I do still have a meeting on Facebook.
Yeah.
But you were very.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you.
All I'm tired. There are several points that you made, several things you made that read for retired, for the retired community. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you staying. Well, thank you all. I appreciate you staying. You took to heart whenever I said I would be offended if you left. So. But thank you all for joining us today, though. Really, I enjoy doing these types of conversations. I don't even like to call them presentations because that means that I'm just standing talking to you if it's a presentation. I like to call it a conversation. But, you know, feel free to reach out anytime outside of this today. I'd be glad to provide any assistance or guidance or anything whatsoever. So, all right. Marlo, would you like to add anything here? Or are we good? Or
I think we're great. Thank you all so much for having us.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Well, I just want to personally thank you, Marlo, and a huge thanks to Jordan for being with us today. And also, I know Jean had to leave the call, but give thanks to her as well for jumping on. And that will conclude our class today. Thank you all.